Hi all, let's look at another trap, and again it's off the back end of a Gambit, and you may wonder, why are these traps part of Gambits? Well, Gambits emphasize quality and time versus material. So, when I do all those positional, sacrifices in blitz games, well, often they're completely unsound and I should really lose, but sometimes, there's quality of the pieces in that particular position. For example, knight supporting past pawns, or king safety, and it's these quality and time elements which balance against the material. So you see a lot of traps emerge from Gambit openings, and the Halosar trap is coming from the Blackmar Diemer Gambit. And I want to particularly emphasize move order. I don't want to skim this. We wouldn't play f3 here, because e5 is a very good move. That's why the Blackmar Diemer was revitalized by the move knight c3, so that if later f3 and e5, you can always play d5 or even just take. It's much better than having your king kicked around in the center. So knight c3 is an important move here, not the immediate f3 if you're going to play this in blitz. Now you play f3, and after e takes, the standard reply is usually knight takes f3, but the Halosar Gambit stems off, in particular, the rider Gambit variation, which is R-Y-D-E-R, by the way, not R-I-D-E-R. So queen takes f3, and so you're offering another pawn, double pawn Gambit, queen takes d4, so it's a center pawn as well, usually quite critical, but that center file you want to occupy rapidly now with this rook. So how are you going to achieve that? You really just want to castle queenside rapidly, so the next move seems kind of logical for that purpose of getting a rook to d1 and trying to castle queenside. Now if black is wanting to avoid what is the strongest move, if black plays queen b4, kind of wanting to set a trap for white, actually, rather cheekily, that if you do the natural castling move, black thinks that they've got you in a trap with bishop g4, skewering your queen and rook. So that's the main line of this, but we're going to cover this other move which is probably far stronger, queen g4, later in the video. Okay, so we're going to look at queen b4 first. So black is trying to trap you now with bishop g4, but you've noted this trap and you don't mind, because you know that there's this ultra cunning resource in this position coming up. So you've just been skewered with bishop g4, and I'll give you 10 seconds to see if you can spot the resource. If you might have already seen this trap from other video annotators. It seems everyone's had a punt at this describing this trap. But if you haven't, have a good think in this position. I'll give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, forget moving the queen. Okay, you just play the move knight b5, rather cheeky. So if bishop takes f3, swallowing the queen, then you have the neat move knight takes c7, which is not just check, but it's mate, because the rook's cut off the king. There's no king escape squares, that's mate. So that would be the worst move. And if queen takes b5, this is also an atrocious move. In this line, you just play bishop takes queen, and it's check, so they haven't got time to take your queen, so you just be a queen up. So a sensible move is knight a6, just to defend c7. But with your last move, you introduce a block of that queen's protection of b7, and this is a good time to snap up the b7 pawn, hitting the rook and the knight. And it doesn't matter about your rook at the moment, because you're going to win that rook with check and cause all sorts of devastation. So black seemingly has a tricky tactical move to rescue the situation here, to create a kind of double attack on your queen and this bishop, which is not actually protected by anything. So black's probably best move here is queen e4, so hitting e3 and hitting your queen. So quite a deep forcing sequence here. We're at move 9 now, and the gambit continues. You take on a6, you offer the e3 bishop, so your king moves. And black has a very constrained set of options here, because look at this development. It's still retarded here on the king side. c7's under fire. Queen b7's a monstrous threat. So black has limited choices. So say they do queen c5, which is one of the more logical moves. Here, there's actually a really crushing move, which I believe Burgess has mentioned, possibly an inferior move. With computer analysis, computers are deadly tactically, and they can find the most incisive moves in the position. And the most incisive move, in my opinion, is Queen B7, not Knight F3. Knight F3 is very strong as well. Let's have a quick look at Knight F3. So Knight F3, say Rook B8, and Black's trying to generate some counterplay on the B file, a logical move, off of that A7 pawn. But after Queen B6, you can play check, you can take, and now here, if you're going to play this line, there's a very powerful move to make sure your advantage is absolutely secured without Black getting too much counterplay and possibly even defending the position and maybe even being better later. You should play A4 here, I believe, and this will secure a very good advantage. For example, E6, and you could start probing D7 with Knight E5. Knowing that B5 is nicely supported with that pawn. So say Bishop D6, you take on D7, and now it all gets really nasty with Knight C8, and Black's position starts tumbling. Okay, that is quite crushing, but I'm going to show you something even more crushing. After Queen C5, forget the Burgess move, let's play Queen B7 instead, and there's a beautiful line I've analysed here. So Bishop takes D1, well, with the help of engines. You play now check, and after King D7, okay, the more observant of you will notice Black's actually threatening to mate White in 2 with Queen takes C2 and Queen C1 mate. You've got to do something about the mate, so you do a pit stop, you just temporarily defend with Knight C3. Okay, materially, you're just a pawn down here, but qualitatively your pieces are far more, they're superior to the Black pieces. Remember, gambits and traps are often a reflection of this balance which Kasparov has talked about many times between material, quality of pieces and time. That's the interrelationship, that's the mathematical formula, if there is one, of chess: material, quality and time. So here White is a pawn down, but the Black king's in the centre. The development over here is still terrible. There's no Knight E4, you can snap it up with Queen E4. Everything's unguarded, and in fact you're threatening now Knight takes D1. So let's move the bishop, and now here a simple move and crushing is just Knight F3. So with Knight F3, you're going to play later Bishop B5 check and Rook D1. You're just getting your pieces out. Now if Bishop takes F3, that wouldn't be too hot for Black, because G takes F3, and you've got Bishop H3 now with tempo. So say King D6, Bishop H3, and again the Rook's going to come to D1, and it's all over. This looks like a trivial win really to me, because the lack of development, the lack of quality, the king in the centre, Black's going to get slaughtered here in this position. But here is a really pretty continuation, which I haven't really discovered in other video annotators' interpretation of this trap, and I'd like to share it with you. Bishop B5 check. I'm demonstrating it because it shows the strength of Queen B7 as opposed to the bog standard recommended Knight F3, or in the past Knight F3. So Bishop B5 check, Rook D1 threatening Queen D8, and now look at this: Queen D8 check, Queen C8, Queen C7. So the Queen has now come to C7 with tempo. Now play Bishop C4 check. So if Queen takes C4, there's Queen E5 mate. So the King crawls up the board, and this is really quite beautiful now. Check, Knight E2 check. Now in this beautiful move, Knight takes E5, clearing that diagonal for the Queen to deliver a pretty mate in this forcing sequence. Knight G4, Bishop takes, Queen G3 now. Remember, we snapped up that pawn so the Queen can come back. Queen F4. And the beautiful final move, Bishop C4, double check and mate, with the King on D5. Quite an aesthetic finish, wouldn't you say? So anyway, so that's the beauty of this gambit, coming off this idea of getting quality pieces and extra time versus material. So let's go back though to a critical position, and say that Black does play Queen G4, because I mentioned this before. The best move is your 2 pawns down here. Material does have to be respected a little bit, And castling queenside, I think, is a completely lost position for white. I don't think there's enough compensation. I think black can reach solidity quite quickly. I think the best for practical chances in this position is to play queen f2, with the idea of later playing queen h4, using f5 for potentially an exchange sack, and trying to carry on the attack with the queen still on the board. So this is now the rider gambit. And let's say e5, and now I'm going to give you a highly optimistic continuation, just to argue my point in a very biased and unfair way. So bishop d6, you castle queenside, bishop e2 attacking that queen. But now you see this idea of the queen's going to come to h4 very soon. So rook f1. Say black was silly enough to let you play queen h4. Then you've got that f file which you peeled open earlier as part of this gambit system. So h6, rook takes f6, and black's really getting it. So bishop takes g5 here, knight e4, crushing. So my recommendation, though, if you're going into this rider gambit line and they're going to play the more sensible queen g4, is to play this queen f2. I did actually look this up in chessgames.com. There's a couple of wins in here for white. Statistically, this whole system is doing very well. Now, part of that is because, you know, defensive play probably wasn't as evolved, and the players weren't, you know, probably as very high FIDE rated in that particular database. So probably this is why it's not really a system, you know, played by grandmasters. Well, a lot of the gambits are not played by grandmasters because you know, they can find you know, almost computer-like defenses sometimes, and actually argue the case for the material side sometimes. But you have to bear in mind that Kasparov has said that, you know, often grandmasters are a bit overly materialistic, and sometimes they do underestimate the value of this, you know, relationship that chess has between, you know, material quality pieces and time. But anyway, I hope let's go back to summarize the main gambit line. So you're offering the d4 pawn, you're castling queenside, you're inviting the opponent to seemingly skewer your queen and rook. You play this stunning knight b5 move. You play queen b7, so you're denting black on the diagonal, you're leaving a lot of pieces en prise, virtually forcing queen e4. You take on a6, leaving your bishop en prise. Black is forced to defend, then c7, and then you play the absolutely crushing move, queen b7. So the idea that after bishop takes d1, you take a pit stop move, knight c3, well, first take on a8, sorry, and then pit stop move, knight c3, defending against black's threat of queen c2 and mating you, kicking that bishop back. You've got a huge lead in development in this position, you're only a pawn down, and you just play the move knight f3, and this is absolutely crushing. And in the glamorous continuation I gave you earlier, let's take a recap of that. So the king's been driven all up the board to be mated on the d5 square. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.